Well, good morning, everybody. All you bright and bushy-tailed public historians getting up early in the morning, thanks for joining us this morning. We are very pleased to have as our plenary speaker today a distinguished scholar in the issue of slavery. He is James Brewer Stewart, has published widely on the subject of slavery with numerous books and articles. He is the James Wallace Professor of History, and he tells me retired provost, and he said that with a great grin on his face, by the way, retired provost at Macalester College in St. Paul, Minnesota. I'm very pleased to welcome this morning James Brewer Stewart.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Can you all hear me? Okay. If you looked at you from my point of view, I can almost not see people in the back there. And there's a tremendous amount of space here in the front. And I feel a whole lot more like I'm talking to an intellectual community or a social group or something like that if some of the people in the back would come up here and move into some of the front tables, because it's really hard for me to be able to relate to an audience this size anyway. So if some of you would be willing to just come up this way, it would make it a whole lot simpler, and I feel a whole lot more confident about what I'm doing. Thank you. Okay, this feels better already. Thank you very much. We don't have a lot of time this morning. I'm a very talkative person, and we're starting late, and I'm going to keep you late. Can't say much else other than that. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. It's a very different conference from the kinds of conferences I'm accustomed to going to, where people sit in face-to-face sessions and talk almost exclusively about their own work. And what they mean by their own work is the book that they're trying to write, the thing that they just published, the grant they're trying to get. I come from the world where there are very large academic projects that are done in history departments. And you come from a world of educators, as far as I can tell, from what I've been listening to and what I've been reading, where the notion of face-to-face exchange, where the idea of teaching people where they are in places and in topics that have real-world significance is very, very different than the kind of world that I've just described that I'm accustomed to. And I like this world a lot better. One of the things that I'm going to try and do today, and it won't become clear until the end of it, what I'm trying to talk about here, is a challenge that we all face as educators. It doesn't matter whether you come from an elite small liberal arts college like the one I taught in for almost 5 decades, or whether you come from a community college someplace else, or whether you're working in a museum, a public history site. The nature of our constituency is about to change very, very radically. The people who show up to learn. The people who show up to learn that I'm talking about are people who are generally called today the millennial generation. They don't think like a 68-year-old does, which is what I am. They think very differently. They are resourced to the world in a completely different way than I am. They are involved in a sense of the local and the global in a way that's very, very hard for many of us to understand and very hard for institutions to adjust to. We all understand that the funding models that lie underneath our various forms of education are in jeopardy. They're hard to sustain and they're difficult to work with. And unless it's possible for us to be able, over the next 15 or 20 years or so, to very agilely begin to think about the impact of this generation on our structures of knowledge and teaching and learning in the same way that we now appreciate the impact of the boomers on what has been done to us and what we've done to ourselves in this regard, it's going to be very difficult for us to be able to get along by, say, the year 2050. So underneath this whole talk is a concern about a rising generation of new learners who are connected to technology and who see the world in ways very differently than someone like I does. What? Yeah, something like that. So I'm going to be talking about slavery, and I'm going to be talking about new abolitionist movements, and I'm going to be talking like a historian. But I'm also going to try to give some understanding, if I can, of what I would be doing if I was thinking to myself, who's showing up at my historic site in the next 20 years? How do people want to be engaged in the world of then and now at the same time? I think probably that people coming to historical sites, doing public history, will have the same, in some sense, antiquarian interest in the past that we always have, which is, it was different back then, isn't that interesting? This is fun to do. But at the same time, all of that is mediated by a different sense of the present and how we relate to the present than would be the case than it would be in, say, 1985 or 1994. The implications roll out differently now than they would have then. Okay, so with that introduction, I'm going to change completely my persona and become a historian for a while. The problem here is that this paper is a very, very schizophrenic hybrid that goes between what I've learned for decades and decades and decades. Do not make the past serve the present in some sort of simple-minded way. If you do that, you'll screw it all up. The past is the past, the present is the present, different back then, and so respect the integrity of the thing. At the same time, what I'm trying to do is to haul that past into an empowering position to help us to understand a big, difficult problem that we've got, which is called human trafficking. It's very hard for us to avoid it. Especially hard for people like me to avoid it, because I got involved in trying to denounce the problem of slavery through scholarship as a consequence of being involved in the civil rights movement. Long, long time ago. And we've all made a whole series of principled statements about the destructive power of race and slavery that radiates into the present, and we've built this huge scholarly edifice to combat it. And at the same time, the question that strikes me at the end of my professional life, which is basically where I am, is what does it mean to suddenly come to understand that there are perhaps twice as many slaves in the world today as there were when Abraham Lincoln became president of the United States? Is there a moral obligation to try and make the scholarship that I've been working on all this time, and that so many other people have been too? This lecture is, in a sense, in honor of John Hope Franklin. How do we square that with the world that we look at now? So I'm about to retreat behind the podium, become a historian, read a text for a while so that I can feel like I'm working in the past. Then I'll return to my persona that you see me in now, and we'll keep going. Okay. Good. Okay. Abolishing slavery in Lincoln's age and ours. It's all about historical memory, what the past means, and what we can do with it. As festivities continue marking Abraham Lincoln's 150th birthday, reflect on these facts. Slavery across the globe is bigger, more profitable today than it was in 1808, when the British Parliament and the Congress outlawed the illegal slave trade. Slavery is also larger and more lucrative than it was even in Lincoln's time, not quite 150 years ago. Putting price tags on human bodies is now more deeply rooted in evil than it was when the great emancipator was emancipating. When Lincoln became president, all the slaves distributed across the Americas numbered no more than about 9 million. Although difficult to estimate, slavery in the Middle East, and South Asia, and Africa raised that total worldwide to approximately 15 million. In our time, the number of enslaved in the world is perhaps twice that, at least 25 million. In Lincoln's era, profits from southern plantations yielded between 5 and 7%. Today, slaveholders expect to make 50% annually on their investments.